Okay, so thank you for that introduction. As he said, my name is Noemi Diaz. I am within the psychology department, and my project is titled The Immigration Story of Maria Guadalupe Reina. Okay, so what is my project about? Why did I do this project? So I conducted a report using literacy devices such as articles, news reports, books, and I even used music that I've listened to in the past, as well as the firsthand account of Maria Reina. I conducted a one-on-one interview with her where I asked her about the events leading up to her immigration and the sacrifices that she had to make for that immigration. And really, it was just to get to know why. So, which leads me to the question of why is it important? Why is knowing this story and stories like hers important? The reason behind it, the importance of her story is that immigration does not end or start or end at the border. There's a very big misconception that immigration starts at the border and it ends once a person has crossed the border, and that is far from the truth. There is much more to the story that people just don't know about. No immigration story is the same. The story that you guys are going to hear today is going to be very different than another story that someone else may have experienced, or you might find similar elements, but pieces are going to be different. And that is just something that I want to reiterate. And then another reason why I chose to use this story and why I think it's important to hear these stories is because if you don't have a firsthand experience or know of a person who has gone through this experience, it's hard to fully understand the challenges, the sacrifices, and just the experience that this person had to endure in order to come to the United States. So with that, I've conducted a video based off of the interview that I had with Maria Reina. This is entirely her story. The only thing that I did was translate it from Spanish to English, but you're going to hear her story. So here we go. My name is Maria Guadalupe Menegildo Reina. I was born on December 6, 1954 in El Puerto del Coco, Guerrero. I like to think of my home as a beautiful place. It was full of so much greenery, and there was never a day you could not find fresh fruits. My house was next to the river that flowed through our town, and I loved it. That was my favorite part about El Coco. Everyone used the river, but that was my place, the place where I always felt peace. One day, when I was 11 years old, my father called me and two of my sisters to the kitchen and said, "You guys are going to Mexico City. Your mom and I need help with money, and we've arranged for you guys to work with some families out there. You are to do whatever they tell you to do. I will come up every month to collect the earnings from you guys, but be sure not to spend any of it." I wasn't surprised when I heard this. A lot of the families in El Coco sent their children to go work in the city. So this wasn't a shock for me. In fact, but then, after being there, alone, in a house I didn't know, full of electrical appliances I had never used or seen before, and away from my family, I was scared. Since my sisters and I worked in different districts with different families, we couldn't see each other. We also weren't allowed to call one another. There was a phone in the house, but we weren't allowed to use it. We were only allowed to see each other on Sundays, but it was only for a short period of time. And it was risky. We were little girls getting on the bus and walking alone through Mexico City. Men would yell at us or talk to us with vulgar language. We always talked about our troubles back at our houses. Sometimes things were good and we had good families. I remember one family I worked for. The husband and the wife were both doctors. They always took care of me. During the time I worked for them, I would get a lot of headaches, and they would run tests and checkups on me to make sure I was okay. They worried because I would have attacks, which I now realize were probably anxiety attacks. I would cry a lot, but I would cry because I always felt afraid. Being in the dark or being in a closed room alone was terrifying for me. And it was because though there are good people, there are also a lot of cruel people. People who think they can do what they want to you. When you are an employee, men are obscene, even those who are hiring you. This was 6 years of my life, but when I was 17, I decided that I was done working for families. My uncle said that he could find work for me and my sisters in a factory, so that's what we did. The factory was a fabric factory, so it wasn't too bad. This was where I met my husband. He worked on the floor above mine, but he and some others were in charge of carrying the fabrics up and down the stairs, so I always saw him. I noticed that he would stare at me a lot, and one day he asked me out to the movies. Apparently, he was too nervous for the date because he didn't show up. But later, the company took us on a trip, and he asked me to officially be his girlfriend, and that was it. He was the one. After 3 years, he asked me to marry him, and I, of course, accepted. This would soon lead to the biggest change of my life. After a few years, we had 2 children. My daughter was about 2 years old, and my son was barely a newborn. One day after work, my husband came home furious. Something had happened at work, and he decided that it was time he left to find work in the United States. It wasn't a question to me. He just said he was going to do it, and that's what happened. Initially, he told me he would find work to bring money back for us or to bring us to the United States. But weeks turned into months, and my father said that I needed to make a choice. Decide if this was a man I really wanted to be with or not. If I still wanted to be married to him, then I needed to leave my kids with them and connect with my husband in the United States. I knew that I could be without him, but I loved him. It pained me, but I knew my kids would be safe with my parents, and I left to the United States to reunite my family. Luckily, I made it safe. However, when I arrived, my husband told me I wasn't going to work. But I needed my kids with me, and I needed our family together, so not working was out of the question. And just as I told him, 3 days later, I found work. It was a long wait to get them here. 6 months had passed when we were finally able to get enough money to bring the kids over. And though I was so happy to be with them again, it was so hard at the beginning. My son was young when I left, so when we reunited, he didn't recognize me. He would cry and look for my mom, and the milk from here would hurt his stomach. So he was sick a lot too. My daughter, though, she knew me. She ran and hugged me so tight. She knew who I was. She knew I was her mom. We didn't have much, and there was still so much we needed to do. But we were finally together, and that's what made a difference for me. Okay. So that was a little glimpse of a piece of her story. So now, why did I choose Maria's story? Well, one of the more personal reasons why I chose her story is because Maria is actually my grandmother. I grew up listening to this story. I grew up listening to bits and pieces of this story, but it was not until I started this project that I was able to get a full image of just how deep and just how much of her story I didn't know about. Even members of my family, we all learned together of different pieces of her story that no one had heard before. And this is something that we are still learning to this day, which when I heard this, when I realized just how much I didn't know about my own grandmother's story, it made me realize that so many people this is a story that so many people will not hear about. And so many people will probably not hear a story similar to this one. And the reason why I think that these stories are so vital, so essential, is because like Maria's story, they provide an understanding of the choices and the sacrifices that she and other people like her had to experience and endure in order to come to the United States. For instance, as you heard in that video, she sacrificed a lot of things from a very young age. She sacrificed her childhood, her safety, her independence, the ability to make choices for herself. Those things were all things that she had to give up for the betterment and for the treatment of her family. And later on in life, she had to continue and make those same sacrifices for her own family by giving up that security, that safety of leaving her children with her parents. And though she knew that she could do that, that her children would be fine with that, that's not a choice that many mothers, one, should have to make and are willing to make, because it's just not something that you would ask of a mother. And in addition to doing that, it led to a lot of other challenges, the challenges related to fear of the unknown of what might happen. And all of this to say that even when she was able to reunite her family, to bring her kids to the United States and know that they were safe with her, there is still the challenges that she and her family experienced. It did not stop there. And that story, again, I want to reiterate that there is a misconception of an immigration story starting and ending at a border. As you saw, her story started as a child, and it did not end once her family was reunited here in the United States. There are many other events that happened far after they were able to be here and stay here. And in extension, her children became members of that immigration story. And while every single member of this story has their own set of challenges, barriers, and even struggles that they had to endure, they also were given opportunities that my grandmother was denied the right of. For instance, my mom, but I mean to say her children, they were able to get an education, choose which university they wanted to attend, graduate from a university, choose a career path for themselves that they thought was best for them, and go on and have a family of their own, and knowing that their family was safe. These were all things that my grandma was denied the right of having from a very young age because of the life that she had to endure and because of the life that was set in place for her. And so I just want to reiterate that if one wants to truly understand a person, and not just a person, but a community, it is important to be open-minded to listening to them, and not only listening to them, but learning about them, their community, where they come from. And once you are able to do that, then you will be able to become open to a wider and a beautiful experience that you may have not known about.
Okay, great. I'm going to have to stop that now because we're about 12 minutes in. Very nice presentation, very beautifully shot, by the way. I think that's something that you could put up on a website.